hunt, and he liked the things like that. And while we were at Black Star, we'd get out on weekends and things and hunt bees, wild bees, in big oak trees and things. You'd find them, and he knew a place. He had bait the place with the so they could find it, get some bees there, and then he'd find their course. And we'd start out where the bait was. And when a bee would take off from the bait, one of the others would have moved up the hill about 40 or 50 feet by a tree or somewhere up there. And they'd be looking for one to come by, and Dad would holler and say, "There's one on the way, one on the way." And the one up there, when he'd say, I see him, he's passing by here." It'd be somebody a little farther up. "Here he comes." They'd watch the bee, and they'd watch him light on the tree that he's got at his desk where he's in there going. So they'd mark the tree. We'd hunt the bees, you know. We wouldn't cut them down that day. We'd come back later on, the marked trees. And they didn't care if you cutting down trees that had what could make a beehive in them and things like that. Anyhow, they didn't keep a care for doing that. The company didn't. It owned them. And we'd do that to hunt honey with. He'd always tried to save the bees by trying to work it to where the queen would go into another place on the same tree. And if she did, they'd saw that off, and then they'd plug up the hole and take them home and get them into a beehive. That's the way he kept his beehives. We'd pick up 2 or 3 of them every summer that way. Sometimes they'd have a lot of honey in them, sometimes they wouldn't, you know. And we always kept a few hives of bees there, you know, at the house. Sometimes they'd freeze out on us, you know, things like that. Or maybe they'd starve, but he'd feed them in the spring to get them started too. He'd put sugared water and stuff around the hives, and he'd feed the bees to get them started. Then later on, they'd swarm, you know. If you could find that swarm, if you could save it, we'd get out in the yard or wherever the bees were swarming, and we'd beat on tin cans or a kettle or something like that, making noise, and that would seem like it would drive them together. The queen would go and light. Here'd come the bees. They'd just be a little handful, and they kept growing until they'd be as big as a football on that tree. The bees would. Then he'd try to get them into a hive if he could. A lot of times he couldn't, but if he could, he'd drive them into there. He had an outfit he'd put on to keep them stinging him. A screen over his head, down over his shoulders and things, you know. He'd get stung sometimes, but not too much. It didn't bother, not enough to bother him. But I sure hated to get stung by them bees. I stayed away from them as much as I could. Us kids would move off from him, you know. Mm-hmm. So that's the story of the bees.
So you would look for beehives, and this was on the camp, right?